Looks like we're at top of the hour. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Nicole Lyons, and I'm here with my colleagues Colleen Sullivan and Vince Starks. And we are from the Jorgensen Learning Center, and we're so grateful that you joined us today. Our little team really focuses in on supporting leaders to have more effective and impactful everyday leadership conversations. Focused in on achieving results for them and their teams. And we are looking forward to this conversation on Reflect and Recharge with you today. Just a couple of logistic things before we get started. Wanted to let you know we are using the Zoom webinar platform. If you're not familiar with it, there are a couple of ways that you can engage with us throughout the session. We have the chat feature, which you should find at the bottom of your screen, and also the Q&A feature that is located somewhere along the bottom of your screen there that you can use to ask us questions and interact with us throughout the session today. So looking forward to seeing your comments and responding to your questions. And do please feel free to use that chat and ask us questions, because we'll want to be responding to your thoughts and ideas as we go throughout our session today. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Colleen to kick us off.
Excellent. Thank you. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I've got to tell you, Nicole actually brought this topic to me. She goes, hey, why don't we have a webinar kind of to wrap up the end of the year, really reflect and recharge? And I got to tell you, man, I rolled my eyes. I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me right now? Who wants to reflect on 2020? Let's get that bad boy over with and move on. And as I thought about it though, and I appreciate this about you, Nicole, she had a lot of data, a lot of information she was bringing forward. She goes, come on, Colleen, it's not all that bad. And I thought, all right. So I did a little bit of research, and instead of just focusing on the last, since March, right? Global pandemic totally dominating the news. I looked back and I remember Australia, the big, huge wildfires in Australia dominated the news, right? Prince Harry and Meghan Markle quit the royal family. Big one. I watched The Crown. So that one was big for me. Of course, the very, very tragic and sad death of Kobe Bryant. I mean, that was just heart-wrenching. But there was also Harvey Weinstein was convicted, death of George Floyd. So the more I looked, I was like, oh, I really do want to sweep this bad boy under the rug. But with that being said, I thought, what an opportunity, not just to focus on some of those things that really hit the headlines, but how can we look at it from a holistic perspective of what's going on in our personal and professional lives that we're really proud of, that's some things that really stood out to us. And so really that's the purpose of our short time today, is what are some things that we can do to really reflect on personally and professionally, and how might we re-energize and refocus ourselves and our energies so we are set to hit the ground running for 2021. So we hope at the end of this, you have some simple, practical ways that you can really enhance those quality of your everyday leadership conversations, whether it's with yourself, with your family, or with your team. So I'm going to go ahead and model one of our learning protocols, and it's called Closing the Learning Loop. I started us out making sure we're all on the same page. Why are we here? And what we hope people walk away with. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Vince, hey, Vince, kind of with that opening statement, what are your thoughts and what is kind of your understanding of the purpose and what we hope people take away from this conversation today?
Sure. Hey, thank you very much, Colleen. So what I understood and what I heard you talk about was, we as an organization, as a company, we decided to kind of look at the possibility of having a seminar and just talk a little bit briefly about reflections and how to recharge ourselves, because it's an essential part of what we do in terms of leadership, whether it's personal, whether it's with our family, or whether it's professional. And so in that, what we hope is that together we'll have a brief conversation today to better understand some techniques and some opportunities in our leadership conversations to walk away and understand, as we close out 2020, how do we look ahead into 2021 with a fresh perspective, relaxed, ready to go, and energized, so we can be more effective leaders, and so we can lead our teams better, and we can help our people work better to achieve whatever outcomes we seek.
Yeah, beautifully stated, Vince. I appreciate that. And one of the things that we say in JLC is what you focus on grows. So once again, going back to some of those negative things that have happened, how can we, I'm not saying sweep them under the rug, but how can we, and that's what we're going to be talking about, maybe respond differently. So thank you so much for that, Vince. How about you, Nicole? Did you hear anything different, or would you like to add anything more? And you're muted.
Sorry about that. My slideshow took over my screen and I couldn't find my unmute button. I appreciate that. Love technology. That's a lot to reflect on this year, right? Is how much we've had to become used to new technologies. And I think what really resonated for me, Colleen, is when you were talking about how easy it would be to just sweep 2020 under the rug and call it a loss and move on. And I think a lot of us kind of are thinking that. I know I'm hearing that from a lot of people. I just can't wait for this year to be over. But I think what we miss out on is this real learning that can occur from reflecting and thinking about what we've experienced and how we reacted to it and how we might want things to be a little different going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, thank you for that. And I'd like just to, before we move forward and really the meat of the conversation today, I'd like just to have our JLC associates introduce each other. And so this is another great way, especially in the virtual environment. You probably are collaborating with different people. Maybe you know them a little bit, but maybe you actually haven't even seen them in person. So this is a great way just to get to know people. And so I'm going to go ahead, and since we kind of know each other, I'll go ahead and start, and I'm going to just introduce my buddy Vince. And I'm going to share one interesting thing about him, and then we'll continue to pass the torch, and then we can move forward. So one of the really cool things that I learned about Vince is that beyond his amazing career in the military, so he was part of the nurse corps, and he was in Navy medicine for many, many years, held tremendous leadership positions. But the real thing that resonated with me was when you told me about how much you love riding motorcycles. So one time I called him, he's under there wrenching away, and I just heard him, and I was like, damn, he really does like this. And he told me he had 2. So I thought that was really unique and something special about Vince. So I'm going to punt it over to you, Vince, and we want to introduce Nicole.
Absolutely. Thank you. I do love motorcycles. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Nicole. We're geographically located in different directions. I'm in Washington, D.C., and Nicole is in the greater Pacific Northwest region of the country. And she's a technical wizard. So everything that we do in our company, technologically wise, Nicole is the architect of that. She brings a wealth of experience from the corporate sector. She spent a number of years as a corporate executive. And so her perspective is amazing. And the one interesting fact that I learned about Nicole and her family, they're really outdoorsy people, kind of earthy. She's always out hiking, walking through the woods. That seems to be the highlight of her weekend. And so great colleague, great perspective, very, very smart, brilliant. And we're very fortunate to know her, to have her as a part of our team, and to lead us into our future. And with that, I'm in. Nicole, would you please introduce our colleague, Colleen?
Thank you so much, Vince. And it would be my pleasure to introduce Colleen. Colleen is a wonderful colleague with a wealth of knowledge and experience working with leaders and teams, and really listening to people is something I've noticed and just love and appreciate Colleen. It's her ability to just lean in and really listen and hear what people are saying, and then be able to offer them very kindly advice and perspective that they may not see about their own situation. So I've loved watching her do that, and love the ability to partner with her. She's really good at executing. I'm really great at ideas, but Colleen is like, all right, now let's get this idea done, which is something I really appreciate about her and her partnership. So I'm so grateful that you all get to see her today in this conversation on reflection and recharging for the next year. So I appreciate your partnership, Colleen.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. And once again, great different way to introduce each other. I encourage you to use that with your teams, especially in the virtual environment. Already, we've modeled a focusing statement. We're closing the loop to make sure we're all on the same page as to why we're here. Now we've got our voices in the room. And one thing, just so you're aware, studies indicate if you don't get people's voices in the room within the first 2 minutes, people really check out. And one of the things our clients come to us all the time and they go, can you help us make our meetings more engaging? So I encourage you kind of to have 2 different things that you're thinking about in our conversation today. And one is, what are myself, Vince, and my compadre, Nicole, what are they doing as they're facilitating the conversation? So really take some notice and take some notes, perhaps, as to the learning conversation and the learning protocols and processes that we're using. So that's one piece. The second thing that I encourage you to do throughout our time today is many of you are already taking care of yourself. You probably have some amazing ways that you're already relaxing and ideas on how you're recharging. So my invitation is to share those with us, and also to perhaps write down these simple things, because I think a lot of what we share, it's common sense. It's not necessarily common practice. So before I hand it over to my compadre Nicole, I did want to share this short quote with you. And it is, without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and failing to achieve anything useful. Without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and failing to achieve anything useful. And that's by Margaret J. Wheatley. And I thought it was a great way just to kind of set us up to dive into our conversation around reflection. Nicole?
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful way, great segue into what we're going to talk about first. We hear a lot about reflection. I think it's kind of everywhere, and it's sort of intuitive that it's beneficial and important. But when we all kind of nod our heads and say, yeah, thinking about things purposefully is probably a good idea. But not a lot of us really dig into a reflective practice in the way that's most beneficial for leaders and teams. The level of reflection that's really valuable for leaders and for teams is where there's a conscious consideration and analysis of your beliefs and actions for the purpose of learning. So that's kind of where we're going to focus today. I'm going to share 3 ways to reflect designed to help you get to that deeper level of reflection. So that at the end of our conversation, you're going to have maybe some new practices and new ideas and ways that you can reflect personally and that you can lead reflection with your teams. So Colleen, what's one thing that you're really looking forward to talking about when it comes to reflection today?
Sure. Well, I think that piece of getting deeper, right? Because I've led many meetings and I've seen people go, oh, well, what'd you learn? People go, well, I learned X. And they're just saying it kind of to check the box, or to fulfill to answer the question. So how can we really dive deeper? I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. How about you, Vince? What's one thing you're really hoping we cover or learn today?
Yes, I think for me, I hope that we're able to cover a little bit of introspective look at self. I think that a lot of times as leaders, we have a lot of focus outwardly. And I think that if we take a few minutes and kind of look at how we internally can look at this issue, I think that would be helpful. So I'm looking forward to engage and learn a little bit about that today.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. I appreciate that. So I think Vince and Colleen, both of the things that you talked about, we're going to dig right into. And the first practice we want to share with you today is, to reflect. the thing that we've been talking about all along, but we have some practices that are going to fall underneath of that I think are really important to you. So reflection in and of itself, it gives your brain an opportunity to pause amidst chaos, which I think if we all think back on this year, that's probably pretty important. There's been a lot of chaos. And it allows us to sort through our observations and experiences and consider multiple interpretations. And we all have an initial reaction. We all have an initial way we think about something that occurs or happens. But if we can dig a little bit deeper, we can see the other possibilities and the multiple meanings that we might be giving to any situation. This meaning that we create really becomes learning. And this is what our organization is all about, is this meaning making and this idea of collective wisdom and learning. So that is what reflection can really bring to the table. It can inform our future mindsets and our actions. And for leaders, this meaning making is really crucial to your own ongoing growth and development and your team's growth and development. So, one of our core tenets is that self-reflection produces personal change. And so that is why this reflection piece is really so core and essential to your leadership capabilities and the way that you honor and work with the people you are in charge of as a leader. There are also some really tangible workplace benefits to reflection. Like there's actually percentages and studies that show that call centers, for example, that employees who spend 15 minutes at the end of the day reflecting about lessons learned, they performed 23% better after only 10 days of reflection. I thought that was pretty interesting to learn that there's like hard data where giving people time to reflect during their workday actually increases their productivity, especially in a call center environment. I don't know if any of you on the line have call centers associated with your workplaces, but those are rough places to work, and it's hard to inspire people to produce more. And knowing that reflection can offer 23% better production, I think is pretty meaningful. Reflection also helps us to understand each other in a team. It offers insights. You saw just a little bit of the way that we reflected on the way that we know each other and work together just a few minutes ago. And just having that interaction makes me feel like I know Colleen a little more and know Vince a little more. And it affects the way that we communicate together, the way that we collaborate together, and the way that we work together. So you can see the benefits of this, not only as an individual, but also as a team. It can also lead to a lot of positive outcomes like shared meaning, greater coordination, clearer communication. So when teams really reflect together, they gain insights, and they then that reflects in their actions and then their results. So Colleen and Vince, I would love to hear from you both, kind of just reacting to what you heard me say, and with the leaders that you coach, where have you seen a positive shift that was due to really purposeful reflection? Colleen, I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, sure. Well, you know, what kind of popped up for me was personal. It was my son, right? Because how many times do we have kids and we want them to do something different? And I really think what happened when my son was, I don't know, I think he was, 15, and he was taking Spanish, right? And the whole focus was helping him understand that if you continue to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, definition of insanity, right? And he did. He kept thinking that he was going to pass that Spanish class by doing a bunch of nothing. So it wasn't until I had those reflective conversations. What are you currently doing? Is that effort truly producing the desired result? So I led him through some reflective conversations. And that's, I think, a big part of that is, how can we hold up the mirror? How can we ask those questions so people pause and go, oh, you mean I need to do something besides sleep with a book underneath my head? You mean I need to pay attention and take notes? You mean I need to go in at lunchtime and study? Oh my goodness. So I think that it's that sense of holding the mirror up and guiding him through some of those conversations for that person, because it can't be me, boom, hitting him over the head. It needs to be him going, wait a minute, my actions are not producing the desired result. What can I do differently? And then he produced change, and he actually shifted his behavior and got a different result. But it was through that reflective process. Vince, how about you?
Yeah, so I want to go more from a business perspective. I can recall sitting at the head of the table as the CEO in my leadership role, and I had two opposing points of view within my board of directors. They were trying to, one side was arguing for a position, the other side was arguing for a position. And I really couldn't discern, to be honest with you, which way we should go, because I thought they were both persuasive. And so you said something to me, Nicole, earlier that caught me. You mentioned the word pause. And so what I did, because I didn't know, was I paused. I just said, I need a moment. And then I verbalized to my leadership team that I was reflecting and that I didn't have the answer. And I was thinking through those things. And so what I was trying to convey was, you don't have to have all of the answers. And sometimes before you make a quick decision, you want to stop, pause, and trust yourself that it's okay not to know everything, right? Mm-hmm. But that allowed me to pause and respond at a later date and time. And so where it helped my leaders was I was sitting in the office later that day, and a couple of folks came to see me and said, they were thankful that I was vulnerable enough to openly acknowledge that I didn't have the answer, and they were given permission to say that they don't have to have the answer. And it was a tool, it was an extra gift. So pause and trust were the two words that you mentioned that I heard in your last comments. And that's what I was thinking about. That's what it meant to me.
Yeah, what a beautiful example of kind of all of the things we've been talking about so far. Colleen's example of really how reflection promotes learning. Like you can really inhibit or restrict yourself from learning if you're not building in those opportunities to reflect. And Vince, your comments there about the unintended gift of taking that pause to reflect was that your team saw you be vulnerable, and it built trust, and it gave them permission to not always know the answer and to give themselves permission to take that time to pause and reflect as well. So what a really wonderful story of modeling the leadership behaviors that we want to see. Some of the things that I wanted to mention for you all on the line, we use reflective practices kind of in our natural conversation here, and you can do that same thing as well. Some of the key tips that you might take forward is to build these things into the conversations that you're having. Make it a part of the way that you lead dialogue and conversation with the people that you lead. There's some really wonderful ways that you can notice and wonder. So just having that in the back of your mind that you can always, in the moment, what am I noticing about my own reactions? What am I noticing about the reactions of others? And what am I wondering? Maybe it's, why am I having this reaction? Was there something that triggered me to feel defensive or to feel judgmental about somebody's thoughts, ideas, or opinions? And noticing that and wondering about it will take you out of an advocacy space and bring you back into a curious space of reflection and inquiry. So that's one of the ways that you can do that. It's also an activity that you can do with others on your team. I could pause the conversation right now and say, Colleen, what are you noticing and wondering right now? And that would bring up some really wonderful conversation. We don't have time to go into all of those in-depth kind of conversations on this short webinar with you all, but just an example of something you might try with your teams to bring forward that reflection in the moment.
And Nicole, if I can offer another one, we always talk about after action reviews. And so this is a great tool. I can use it for myself. I can use it if I'm doing a project. I can use it with my team. So I'll give you the 3 reflective questions that you can use in your after action reviews. And please take them, adapt them, adjust them to meet your specific needs. But the first one is, what are some of the things that are going well, right? What are some of the things that are going well? And it can be, what are our strengths as a team? What are some things that are going well around communication? It can be around a project. You just finished a project with your team. Let's really focus on some of those successes and big wins in our project. So that's the first question. Focus on strengths. What are some things that are going well? The second one is, what are some opportunities for enhancement, or what might we do differently next time? And the third question would be, what are our most significant learnings from this experience, from this process, or from this project? So once again, what are some things that went well, or the strengths? What are some things, enhancements? And the final one is significant learnings. And those really help bring forward your learnings for the next time. So you can constantly, because that's that part about the reflection, going back to my quote, right? Without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences. How can I use reflection, as Nicole says, as a learning opportunity? And it's consistent. It's not just one and done at the end of the year because I'm writing up Nicole's, her performance report. It's a continual thing that you can embed into your meetings and conversations with your team.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. I appreciate that. That was beautiful. And I put those in the chat for those of you who are wanting to capture those questions. So in case you wanted to see them, there, I put them in the chat for us. And that really is a wonderful lead in actually to our second tool, and that is to write it down. What Colleen mentioned there, you could do out loud, but also there's a lot of ways that you can incorporate reflection into a practice of journaling or writing things down. Scientific studies have shown that journaling is really sort of a help-all or cure-all for a lot of things that we face in modern life. There's some really obvious benefits like boosting your mindfulness and really being able to see your thoughts on paper. There's something that happens when we physically write, even versus typing, that allows us to process differently, which is really cool. but it can improve our memory and communication skills. But studies are finding that a journaling practice actually can have an impact on your IQ, your immune system, and your sleep. So I thought that was pretty amazing. The way that journaling allows us to label emotions and acknowledge the events that have happened to us, whether they've been sort of traumatic or whether they've been just an experience that was negative for us. It allows us to really shift in from like we've been talking about this entire call, from having our initial reactions to a reflective space where we're actually learning something about what has happened to us. So that can have a really positive effect on people and individuals. And as Colleen mentioned as well, as we look at ways that we can be reflective and what we focus on will grow, it's really important to think about your journaling practice as a way to get out all of those thoughts and ideas and build in this level of inquiry so that we're focusing on what we want to grow. What went well? What do we, what might we do differently, or what have we learned are really some key things. So being able to write those things down and label them are really important. One of the things that Colleen mentioned was doing an after action review. So that can be after a specific event or an idea, but you can also build into your practice some degree of repetition. So you might think about how you use reflective practices in things that you're already doing. Our last tool, or not our last tool, our third tool in the reflection piece is the idea of repetition. So as we think about ways that we can incorporate a new habit into our lives, one of the things that is the most effective is to stack it. Stack it with something that you are already doing. So if you're looking to build a reflective practice into your day or into what your team is doing, think about something that you're already doing and how might you incorporate a reflective practice into some of those spaces. So for example, if you have a regular team meeting that you lead, is there a way that you can incorporate more reflection into that time? Whether that's an opportunity to ask some questions like Colleen gave us, a weekly review of, hey, what were our intentions to accomplish this week? What did we do? What did we learn? And what might we do differently? And you might think about doing that as a weekly review or a daily review with your team. You might think about doing that between the meetings that you schedule for yourself during the day. I know as a leader, oftentimes you're back to back in meetings throughout the day, but I highly encourage you to schedule in some reflective time within your day. Maybe you can schedule meetings for 45 minutes versus for 1 hour, and then use that 15-minute buffer time to have a reflection, write down a few things, a few bullet points, draw a picture, something that will allow you to reflect in a different way about your last conversation or your day. When we think about journaling, I think a lot of people have a negative impression or idea of what that has to be, or regular reflection. Do I have to have an hour in my morning? And the answer is really no. It's really a flexible process, more focused in on what works for you as an individual. You can have a regular, repetitive, reflective practice every morning when you take a shower, or every evening as you're washing the dishes. So long as you're spending some intentional time reflecting on your day, what has happened to you, what has occurred, in a way that allows you to notice what went well, what you're grateful for, and how might you move forward from that space. I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to the other elements and pieces of our conversation today, but really quickly, Colleen and Vince, what was one thing that you noticed about this reflection piece that stood out for you? And then I'll hand it off to Colleen to introduce our next section. So Colleen, tell me one thing that stood out for you in this last conversation.
Sure. I think it's the repetition. I think that concept of stacking, how, in order for anything to become a habit, it's critical that you are very intentional about it at first, embedded into your daily behavior. And then I think after that, it really becomes second nature. So my one thing that resonated with me is, as an action item, it's writing it down and being intentional to embed reflection into those daily, everyday conversations that I'm having with myself and with my team. How about you, Vince?
Yeah, I like to write it the write it down aspect as well. You know, having had the pleasure of having a boss who did that every day, he modeled that. And I would go in his office and he knew as much about items and elements that I was responsible for, because he was reflecting on the things that I needed to accomplish. And he would often sit down every day and open his book. And he would say, hey, let's kind of go over these things. And I would be there taking notes, you know, trying to keep up with him. And so I learned by that modeling that it really does make a difference if you have an opportunity to write things down. So as you stated, it just brought that thought back to center mass for me.
Awesome. That's beautiful. Thank you both. And Colleen, I'll hand it over to you to talk about our next 3 practices.
Absolutely. So far we've hit 3 of our 6 R's, right? The first one was reflect. The second one, we're taking the R out of write, because that was our second one, that write. And the third one was repetition. So now we're going to kind of transition over to the recharge part of our conversation. And I just kind of wanted to start it off with just some statistics that I looked at. And then I'm going to ask you actually, Vince, to react to what you're hearing. And you might be hearing this for the first time, but I got to tell you, I pulled these up and I was pretty startled. It's according to the American Institute of Stress, about 33% of people report feeling extreme stress. And this just came out in November 6th of 2020. 77% of people feel that stress affects their physical health, and 73% of people believe that stress impacts their mental health. And as a result, that does impact their ability to perform on the job, as well as their personal life. The second thing that I did want to share is the highest level of stress from everyone that has been out of all of those people, believe it or not, it's the Gen Xers, right? Am I getting it right, Nicole? I think it's the Gen Xers. They're 18 to 23. I'm like, that's my child, right? So there is not only, when we think about our stress in our professional life, I think it's important to think about the stress levels of those people around you, especially some of these younger kids. So as we talk about that recharge and stress, I wanted just to ask you kind of, Vince, what are your initial reactions to that? And what are some of the things that you do really to recover and recharge, either personally or professionally?
Sure. So let me just start by saying I was not aware of the statistics that you read. But equally, when I look at what's been happening, and you started this earlier in our segment where you listed a lot of the events that have just happened in 2020, I'm equally not surprised. I think that the level of stress throughout the nation is extremely high. And from the time of those statistics, I bet that those numbers are much higher today than they were when they were reported. So yes, that's a factor. And I do think that, you know, you do have to recharge yourself and learn how to relax. And so the story I like to share with you is just I call it the car in the parking lot, right? You know, professionally, when I was a command leader, I had my parking space. And I didn't think people paid much attention to where the boss parks, but believe it or not, they do. And so you have to recognize that when you're as a leader and you're talking to your people and you're saying, hey, it's important you take care of yourself. It's important that you recharge. You have to model the very culture that you want to emulate in your organization, because people follow more what you do than what you say. And so in my example, I had to be very deliberate in leaving the office at a reasonable hour, because what I recognize and what some of my sub-leads come and tell me, they say, sir, until you leave, people feel obligated to stay because they see the boss's car in the parking lot, right? And so you have to be very intentional at making sure that you as a leader take the time to demonstrate by example your ability to go and to decompress and to take some time away. And doing so brings value to your outcomes. If you're recharged and you're refreshed, and you insist that your team recharges and refreshed, what a wonderful opportunity to come back to be fully engaged, to bring the full power of the organization and the synergies of energies and efforts to achieve your organization's outcome. So that would be my personal example on what I had to do and how I had to approach that, and why I did it with my people, because of what I want to achieve in terms of outcomes.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And that goes back to modeling the way, right? You've got to walk the talk. If as a leader, you're saying, all right, well, you really need to make sure you keep a balanced life and take care of yourself. And then you're the last guy there at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, you're up at 5 a.m., emailing, answering your phone, doing these things. you're really not modeling. And that's our first R, is that recover piece, right? That is so critically important. And I want to just add, when we think about recovering and really that relaxing piece, sometimes I think that we limit ourselves and we think, well, I took the day off, or I went for a hike. My invitation is to think about it from 4 different perspectives. Think about, how are you really going to recover and take care of yourself emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, and physically. So there's a lot more just to, well, I go to the gym and I'm going outside and I'm taking a walk. Okay, well, that's great. But I got to tell you, man, I look out my window and people are walking with their phone and they're on a conference call and they're doing this. And so they're multitasking. So are they really, truly taking that time to recover and recharge? Probably not. So I would invite you to think about how you might be able to find ways to truly take care of yourself emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, and physically. And so that's our first R, which is recover. But before I pivot, I'm just going to also ask Nicole, what's one way that you take care of yourself in one of those capacities, either emotionally, physically, intellectually, or spiritually?
I found that having a commitment, like a yoga class that I attend live, has been really helpful for me, especially during the pandemic. Not like in person, but virtually online. Having a class that I go to every week has been really a way that's helpful for me to stay committed to that reflective space. I think yoga is a really reflective space for me. And it also incorporates some of those other elements that you mentioned, Colleen, moving my physical body and getting connected with my own spirit or whatever, I think is important to me. And having a scheduled way to do it, I think has been important. Like, people that I know are going to be on this call and expecting me to show up has helped me to stay committed to it. So I think that's my biggest tip, is to, if it's important to you, I know I oftentimes live and die by my calendar, is to schedule it, to put it on the calendar and to be committed to it. And another tip I have for you, Vince, it really struck me when you mentioned, the example you set as a leader. And as a leader, sometimes I know we're up really late at night, sending really late emails or really early emails. You can schedule those to send at a specific time through pretty much any email provider, so that your people, you're modeling, hey, I'm sending this email during business hours, even if you're not doing that work during business hours.
That's right. No, good point. Good point. I appreciate that. So great ways to recover, right? So that was our first R. And I'll go back to the Gen Zers, and thank you for that. The Gen Zers, I think it's important to share these things with everyone, with your spouses, with those around you, because I think that whole physical piece, we fight with kids about screen time, and here we are, get up and go in your Zoom call, and then it's like we're hardly getting them outside. Well, it's kind of wet and damp. So I think it's really important even to coach those around us in our personal lives around that recover piece. So we've got recover. The second one I'm going to lay on the table is reset. So as we're really recharging, how can we reset, and how can we remind ourselves, what do we stand for and what's our purpose? If you're leading a team, really help them get back focused on what are really their main purpose of roles and responsibilities. What is that team designed to do and produce? And really focus on maybe some of those strategic goals. Many of you guys are having these meetings. You're really focused on some of those success conditions and what it is you're trying to accomplish in this next year. Really help rally back around, get a common understanding of that defined purpose. So it's a great time to reset. So the third one is respond. So as we really think about responding, my invitation is to consider the difference between reacting and responding. And let me just share a colleague of ours, a story that he shared with us. I think in our last meeting, it was Joe, and Joe's doing a lot of coaching with a lot of different executive leaders in Navy medicine, really across the country. And he said one pattern that he continues to hear is people keep going, well, I have all these things to do. I'm not getting through my checklist. I have these things that are just piling up. So it's this sense of not getting everything done and like rolling things forward. And so my invitation is to think about the emotional tax that really takes, because, you know, and to pause, to think, do I really need to do these things? How can I respond differently when I think that these things are really stacking up? What truly are some of the things that I can let go of? What are some of the things that I can reach out to my team to seek assistance with? And what perhaps might be some of those things where it's like, you know what? In this virtual world that I'm in, I don't really even need to address these. So really, how can we choose a response that will let us release some of this so we're not putting additional burden on us as we pivot and move forward and think about what it is we want to achieve in 2021. So I'm going to pause. I want to once again close the learning loop. Hopefully you've noticed multiple times, Nicole's closing the loop, I'm closing the loop, and Vince is offering some sage advice. Anytime you put 3 to 5 pieces of information on the table, it really, really is important that you do this particular pause to let people create meaning about the information, because each one of you are listening and coming to a conclusion that may or may not be the one intended. So how can we ensure that we're truly developing meaning that you guys can walk away and implement? So that's kind of this piece that we're doing right here, is closing the learning loop. So I just want to reach back out to Vince just to say, we hit those 3 R's in the recharge and re-engage piece. We hit recover, reset, and respond. So what resonated most with you, and what else would you like to add before we kind of close it out today?
Yeah, so I'm just going to add one point on the response section. That's what you talked about. And as you talk, it stimulates something. So here's what I did. This doesn't have to be complicated, right? All this list and things are piling up, you talked about, and people really feeling stressed. And so I'm a people person. I rather go out and talk to people, shake hands, than sit in my office and do paperwork, but paperwork is important too. And so I just made a deal with my administrative assistant. I said, hey, go through this pile several times a day. If it's in my inbox, that means get to it when you want it, whenever I can. If it's on my desk, it means, hey, before you go off and take another phone call or set another meeting, why don't you sit down and look at these folders? If you put a folder in my chair, that means don't you do anything, Vince, until you take care of that business. And so that was an alternate way to kind of manage this sense of being overwhelmed by tasks and deliverables, and I didn't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
Right? I was able to reach out to my resources and find a unique way that worked for me, that still allowed me to do the things I had to do, but also do the things that I enjoy doing as a leader. So as you talked about that response component, that's what really resonated to me and stood out.
Yeah, no, I really like that. It's reaching out and establishing a system, right? You had a little team of 2. You established a system and a process, so you knew what were things that don't even sit in that damn chair. You pick up that folder and you get her done. And so it helped with the sense of priority and sense of urgency. Yeah, that's great. It really helps you know when to really get on it, and that sense of timeliness. How about you, Nicole? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I love the respond piece for me, Colleen. And I think it speaks to how we can let things weigh on us as individuals, whether it's a conversation we know we need to have, but we're avoiding, or a task that we've been keep adding to our to-do list, or something we feel like we should do, but we really don't want to do. Releasing those ourselves from those things, or actually taking care of the thing. You know, I've seen little memes go around about, it took me 15 minutes to do this task that I've been spending, hours and hours of my life dreading every single day. So I think that just really speaks to me. Like, if we can respond intentionally and release ourselves from that weight we're carrying with us, that's really meaningful. So I really appreciate that. Thanks, Colleen.
Yeah. And we also got someone that wrote in and says, Covey's 4 human endowments come to mind in what I just shared: that self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will. And so creating a space to consider and utilize these endowments. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that offering. And with that, Nicole, I'd like you to go ahead and maybe hit on some of our upcoming events. We're really shifting things around at JLC. We want to be able to engage in lots of different ways. So Nicole, we'd love for you to share additional information around these upcoming events.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, I'm super excited to share with you all. You can all check out gojlc.com and see the things that we're going to be talking about today. Plus, you'll get a follow-up email with some direct links to these offers. We have a really special offer for anyone who's joining us on a call like this for a team learning session for you and your team. That's a 90-minute session that we're offering at a really special rate for those of you who are willing to connect with us in these spaces. So I would love for you all to check that out when you get the link later today. The next thing that we have is you're going to notice that you can sign up for a conversation like this monthly. So we're going to have a monthly, everyday leadership conversation event where we'll be taking on a different leadership topic and having some really wonderful conversation like you saw here today. And then the other thing I want to introduce you to is our podcast. We are going to be introducing the Everyday Leadership Conversations podcast at the beginning of the year, and we're super excited to really explore some wonderful topics with our team, with Dr. Ray Jorgensen, and we look forward to you all subscribing and being in conversation with you in that new way in the coming year. And as I mentioned, you'll get an email with links to all of these elements where you can check those things out and see new ways to engage with us at JLC.
Yeah, thanks for that. So these are just great ways to kind of recharge and stay focused. As Nicole mentioned, the team learning session can be for you and your team. You can have one of the JLC associates really support you, and the other two are great ways for you to really continue to engage with us. And those two on the right, the monthly learning event and the podcast, are offered at no charge. So cool. So our last final checkout, just want to make sure that we get kind of our last wrap up. Let's say if you were going to have one word to describe what you're most looking forward in 2021, my friends, one word to describe what you're most looking forward to in 2021. I've caught them flat-footed.
Yeah, I would say just healing. Healing is probably the word for me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see us to reunite and heal.
Yeah. Nice.
And I'm out.
Thank you, Vince.
Yeah, I think for me, intention is going to be my word for 2021. Do everything with great intention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think for me, I will go back to unity. I'm just looking forward to unity in all areas and in all aspects of my life. So thank you, and I'm out. So thank you guys. And thank you so much for those of you who took time out of your very busy day to join us. We hope you enjoyed this in-learning conversation with our JLC associates today. Once again, thanks to my compadre Vince and Nicole. We so appreciate your time with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you in our next webinar next month. Thank you.
Bye-bye.